This is March 30th, 2015. This is the Shirley Grognards for March 30th, 2015, at least. And this is Peter Bowman. And as always, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Eric Carlson. How are you doing tonight, Eric?
Well, apparently neither of us are terribly coherent at the moment.
Not too bad. So,
yes.
Tonight we talk about the bloodsuckers.
Fucking Congress.
I meant vampires, but whatever.
So did I.
We've touched on vampires a little bit here and there. I know we talked about them a bit in our favorite monsters episode.
Yeah, I think we did. But there's a lot of shit to do with vampires.
Well, yes, because they're remarkably prevalent.
Yeah, they are prolific beasts. I think we need to start out as to what defines a vampire, though.
Well, okay.
Because there's so many different iterations of the fuckers.
There are a whole bunch of them, and across the world, honestly. And they are... Yeah. What gets classified as a vampire and doesn't is sort of a little fuzzy. Yeah.
I think a good way to define vampires is undead in some way and requires something needs to prey on the living in some way in order to sustain itself.
That's a good portion of it.
Which covers Guangxi, is that what they're called? The bouncy
Jiangxi.
ones? Junxi, yes.
Jiangxi.
I knew it was something like that.
Yes.
I knew there was a Xi involved.
Yes.
Who are more or less mindless, from what I understand.
They are, pretty much. Occasionally you'll see some that are in some fiction, which, like, there's a master Jiangxi, which is sentient.
Right.
But the rest of them aren't. Those are the Chinese hopping vampires, which we'll touch on at some point.
Which are awesome.
They're kind of cool, yeah. Why don't we start things off...
ridiculous when portrayed in film.
But they're... We'll get to that. For starters, we should talk about sort of some of the basics,
Yeah.
There are a whole bunch of them, but the ones that almost everybody is most familiar with are the classic European vampires.
Yes. Undead, drinks the blood of the living in order to sustain itself. Sapient, although not necessarily like a human intelligence.
Right.
Some of the really old ones are downright feral, just stupidly smart.
Right. Honestly, the thing that most people, the vision most people have of vampires, the sort of...
It was Bela Lugosi.
Well, not just that, but, the more charismatic, more human ones that are just, that sort of thing, were popularized in fiction in the 1800s originally. Most people immediately assumed that it was Bram Stoker's Dracula that did that. It was not.
No, the Dracula and Bram Stoker's Dracula is closer to the feral thing I mentioned. He's more like an intelligent beast that plays at being human but can't quite get it right.
True, but the other big thing about it is, Dracula was written by Bram Stoker, was in 1897. The first and probably most influential of them, the ones that what sort of formed our sort of vision of what vampires are, was probably The Vampire, spelled with a Y instead of an I, by John Polidori in 1819, featuring the vampire Lord Ruthven.
Guy owes me money.
Apparently, exploits further explored a series of vampire plays, which he was the anti-hero. He had a series of Penny Dreadful serial publications. The vampire theme was also Penny Dreadfuls type stuff, such as Varney the Vampire, which also predates Dracula. That's sort of the mid-1800s. And later on in the early 20th century, of course, the seminal film Nosferatu.
Yeah, Nosferatu is a good movie.
It's brilliant, but that is not a vampire the way most people think of them today. I mean, it hits most of the points, outside of the sort of
No, the Nosferatu are totally a Camarilla clan.
they are now, but
Ching.
and they were completely and utterly influenced by this movie.
Mm.
They draw heavily on it.
To put it mildly. Lifted whole cloth, honestly.
Yes. So that sort of view of the vampire's been around. They're largely in many ways sort of the vampire as a whole in Europe is sort of I guess, and actually probably mostly worldwide, is sort of almost a sort of an allegory.
They're an analog for disease and death, at least originally.
Yeah, disease more specifically.
Because they come and they drain your life and they infect you and make you into one of them.
Right.
And they're very much a disease metaphor in that. Of course, in the 20th century, having largely conquered disease, thank you vaccines and penicillin,
Yes.
they're much more about sex.
Weirdly,
And to
yes.
say much more about sex, they are entirely about sex.
Thank you, Anne Rice.
Oh, even then, like friggin' Bela Lugosi
Yeah.
is like extrudes charm and suave debonaireness and predatory grace because he's playing up the sexy cultured vampire.
Well, also it's fucking Bela Lugosi.
It's also Bela fucking Lugosi, yeah.
But yeah, it's there's this whole sort of angle, sex, blood, and death that sort of
Yeah.
just sort of revolves around, and that even that's you find that within Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yes. What's her name? Helen? Not Helen. Mira.
Mina Harper.
Yes. Yeah, she's all about the sexy vampire, awesome. I'm totally gonna hit that.
Yeah.
Partially because she's, kind of enthralled, literally, like, brain melted type. But
Yes, and there's the whole sort of predatory charm that Dracula has, and that's present in the book too.
yes.
There's something really enthralling about him, and it's one of the really good parts of Dracula, the novel. Even if both of us find it are not super enthralled with the book, it's a good book.
Part of the problem is I'm just not fond of the prose from the time. Like I can plow my way through Frankenstein. It's fucking amazing. Dracula is just a little too much. It's not quite as good.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that Frankenstein, to sidebar briefly, is a more complicated sort of allegory type thing.
Yes, but we're not talking about Frankenstein.
No, we're not. We're not talking about Frankenstein.
We're talking about vampires.
We're talking about vampires. Yeah, I mean, we both find vampires interesting, obviously.
Yeah. Asterisks.
We find actual vampires interesting.
Even the vampires from Vampire the Masquerade, the old White Wolf game.
Yes.
I found them interesting, like, when I was younger, but as I've grown older, particularly the Camarilla vampires, they kind of get underneath my skin.
Yeah, I can see that.
They spend out so much of their time with the back of their hands stapled to their foreheads, even the ones trying really hard to pretend they don't.
I think part of that is partially due to the people who became enthralled with the game universe.
Yes. Part of that is also the prevalence of Anne Rice. Back to her again. She single-handedly caused the huge vampire resurgence during the 90s.
Yes, but the thing is, like, if you actually read her books, and the first couple are good, Interview with a Vampire and The Vampire Lestat are great. Honestly, they're a lot of fun. They're also probably two of the
Louis still a whiny bitch.
Sure, but Lestat's fucking awesome.
Yes, Lestat is awesome.
Lestat is a badass. And, he doesn't really waste a lot of time.
That's also very much the dichotomy you have in White Wolf's Vampire. Is you've got Louis, who is the Camarilla, and Lestat, who's the Sabbat. Which are the much cooler guys.
There's a mix that in the Camarilla, too, though, is the thing. I mean, yeah, there are the sort of, oh, woe is me, what have I become? And there's a lot of good...
Every Toreador ever.
A good chunk of them. Well, not all of them. I mean... I hate to reference this show because it was a terrible show.
Kindred the Embarrassed.
Yes, but there was some good that came from that. There was a TV show in the 90s called Kindred the Embraced, which was supposedly based on Vampire the Masquerade.
Supposedly.
And it was loosely based on it. And they got a few things very right. They got the Toreador spot on.
Yeah.
And the Toreador, the leader of the Toreador, I can't remember her name, the character's name, but she was really cool. And
the fucking Nosferatu character was like, you are not at all what I want to play when I want to play Nosferatu.
But he was an interesting character.
He moped in the sewers and painted pretty pictures.
I liked this.
It's like, dude, you're a monster. Enjoy it.
Actually, I thought that really the sort of the contrast between his sort of bestial appearance and the tragedy of that contrasted with the fact that he's actually this Renaissance man.
Yeah,
that the tragedy of that's brilliant. The acting didn't help.
And that's all well and good, but the guy couldn't act out his way out of a bag.
Well, almost no one in that show could.
Which didn't sell it at all. And I'd probably like him better if he was acted at all competently. But like at the same time, it's like, dude, you can be a Renaissance man and enjoy being a gribbly monster. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I just look at gribbly monsters and go, I want to be a gribbly monster. Why aren't you enjoying it?
Yeah, I can see. I understand that. I think there's a lot of cool drama to be mined in that sort of the whole. Yes, on the surface, like almost everything about him is this bestial monster, but he's at his heart is not.
I don't remember him being all that bestial. He just was bald and had some wrinkles and pointy ears.
Well, the limits of their budget on makeup jobs. I mean, I
think it was more they just didn't want to have him to be actually gribbly.
I think it's more that they really didn't want to spend all the money to make him particularly gribbly. They merely made him ugly.
Not even that ugly, honestly.
Compared to everyone else in the show?
Everyone else in the show is friggin' injection molded out of, like, friggin'... Yeah. They could spend the fucking the makeup budget to make everyone look that pretty. They can make him a bit more gribbly.
Yeah, well, anyways.
Anyway.
It's a bad show, but they got a few things right. As I said, they got the Toreador pretty right. The Prince was the most boring character ever.
I don't even remember the Prince.
He's the protagonist of the show too. It's awful.
That tells you how well done he was.
Oh, it was a terrible show. Terrible show. But I think they caught some of the. There were a few characters in the show. It's like, okay, yes, they truly enjoy being what they are, but they aren't flat out monsters either. And I think that's sort of interesting.
Yeah, and that's. Yes, and that's part of the thing about. It's part of the thing about that genre of vampire, is the. Some of them enjoy what they are, but without completely succumbing to the dark side, for all intents and purposes.
Right.
And cool, awesome, you can do that. That's great. But so, maybe it's mostly the Prince I'm thinking of about being a whiny little bitch about. I'm a monster.
Yeah, most of the actual leaders of the various clans actually weren't that whiny in that show.
Okay.
The Bruja leader was a corporate thug.
I remember that actually,
which is really freaking weird, but kind of cool in a weird sort of way. Thinking about it,
I remember that. Thinking about now that I think about it, he was like very much a Lex Luthor type of character,
almost
but not as smart.
The really weird thing about the way they portray the Bruja on that, the Bruja are sort of in most of the vampire sort of the role playing game stuff, the way most people latch onto them.
They're anarchists.
They're anarchists, punk rockers, such and. In the show, they're this weird sort. They really, in terms of the way they're
much more mafiosos.
Right. They're structured more like I can't remember the name of the clan all of a sudden. The Tremere.
No. They're more like the Giovanni, honestly.
Well, I'm sticking with the in-Camarilla stuff, but.
Oh yeah. Okay, yeah, with the rigid hierarchy and everything.
There's a rigid hierarchy and everything. It's like, okay, yeah, that's the Tremere weren't in the show, so they sort of conflated the two, I guess.
Hmm.
And they had more.
Let's take all the things that suck about being a Tremere and play that up while removing all the cool shit like the magic and whatnot.
Yeah, well, they didn't want to go into the magic stuff, and I can't fault them on that, given the budgetary constraints again. But there's a lot of interesting stuff. I think there's a lot of interesting sort of dichotomies that within Vampire the Masquerade stuff.
Oh, certainly. The
Just never played up that way.
the Suddites, for example, are all about like pleasures of the flesh and temptations and overindulgence, none of which they can actually enjoy themselves.
Right.
And that's an interesting dichotomy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they live vicariously through other people, trying to get them to indulge in the things that they can't. They're also horrible bastards, but everyone that's not in the Camarilla is a horrible bastard.
Most of the Camarilla is pretty bad, too.
Most of the Camarillas are horrible bastards.
I mean, let's be honest here. I mean,
Yeah, everyone in that world is a horrible bastard.
and I conceptually love the idea of the whole sort of, becoming a monster and desperately trying to hang on to some shred of your humanity. I think that there's a lot of cool stuff to mine for role-playing in that.
Yeah, certainly, but at the same time, I'm like, yes, I could play a Bruja or Nosferatu and do that. Or I could play a Shimise, have crazy shape-shifting powers, and be like, wee, look at all my cool shit.
That's because you like being a monster, Eric.
I love being a monster.
That isn't everybody's thing. But I agree with you that you don't have to play it for hand permanently stapled, back your hand permanently stapled to your forehead. Oh,
Yeah.
woe is me. You could be a lot more proactive about that sort of stuff. And that's where my big problem with a lot of the way vampires play.
The way vampire is done in general. And generally, on the occasion when I deigned to play vampire, I was much more interested in werewolf, honestly. That was much more of the, like, why are you guys moping? We're vampires. We've got superpowers. Yeah, we can't use them all the time because, then we get burned at the stake. But enjoy it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of that is it's also due to the fact that, it's... I don't know. I'm of two minds about vampire. I've played a little bit. It's never was my cup of tea.
Yeah, and wasn't really mine either. I was much more interested in werewolf werewolf was totally my cup of tea. Doomed heroism and monsters and weird cosmological surrealism.
Yeah, I agree.
It's totally more my cup of tea.
I totally get that. I'm not a big fan of the World of Darkness in general. It's not my
right,
thing. But
it is a little grimdark, to put it mildly.
Yeah, well, everybody is fucking doomed all the time.
Yeah.
Unsurprisingly, the only part of the old World of Darkness that I really liked at all were the mages.
Yeah, mages seem to be much more your cup of tea.
Well, yeah, because they were actually trying to do something about like fixing things,
and they weren't at all doomed. They were losing, but they could pull it out of they could still pull a win out.
Yes, and they actually were actively trying to do so, whereas everybody else was going, "Oh fuck, everything is fucked." Shit. It's like the werewolves.
Yeah.
We've been fighting a war that we lost 1,000 years ago. Well,
we are so fucked. Well, might as well go out in a blaze of glory.
And I can respect that. They're desperately trying to angle for last minute the bridge type stuff.
Yes. And yeah, I'm a sucker for that shit.
Oh, it's great. Don't get me wrong. I love it in storytelling, less so in role playing.
I even love it in role playing. Like,
I like it in doses.
If one of my characters is going to die, I want to be last man on the fucking bridge.
Oh, sure. That's great. It's a great moment, but the whole campaign can't be that. Is my problem.
No, the whole campaign can't be that.
And that's sort of, and it's not what werewolf ends up being, but or at least it shouldn't be. But it often seems to be. Actually, werewolf often seems, from what I've seen of it, werewolf ends up being everybody being werewolves and smashing stuff, which is fine.
Yeah, which is all well and good and fun.
But
who doesn't like turning into a 9-foot tall wolf monster and stuffing bad guys in your mouth? I mean,
yeah, I can see that.
That's a good time.
But yeah, I think my biggest problem with with both the mages and I don't know, World of Darkness is great, but we should talk more about vampires.
Yes, we'll talk more about vampires, and we got distracted by
World of Darkness,
Vampire the Masquerade, and World of Darkness at large, which was going to happen. We're going to
talk more about Vampire the Masquerade at some point, also. Because
yes.
But yeah, I think it's really so back to just vampires as a whole. I mean, we touched a little bit on it. Sort of part of the, I think a large part of the fascination is they are monsters who are in many ways indistinguishable at first from humans.
Yes, I think one of the things about vampires is the way. One of the things I find really interesting is the way they evolve in folklore and popular culture.
Yes.
I think that's really interesting and shows a lot about how about the general zeitgeist, the people paying attention to vampires. The like you've got the suave predatory aristocrat in the 20s with Bela Lugosi, who and vampires sort of drop off the face of the earth for a little while there and become camp, with like the monsters and the like.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the 70s, we've got the Hammer films with Christopher Lee's portrayal of Dracula, who's much more feral and still very powerful and intelligent and sophisticated, but he does not like pull punches. He is a horrible fucking bastard and a brute, honestly.
Right. Yes.
And it's much more about it's like, well, it plays in the cynicism of the 70s and the complete mistrust of anyone with any degree of power.
Yeah. Definitely true. And you see vampires showing up other places too. I mean, they were a popular trope in Japan actually for amongst anime for a while too.
Yes.
I mean, you started with like Vampire Hunter D, and eventually into Hellsing.
Right. The vampires are more just the thing is in anime in particular, less so in Japanese horror, but in anime in particular, the vampire is very much just sort of another superhero. They're a spookier superhero, but they're just a superhero
Or villain.
or villain. Yeah.
Often villain, but though occasionally, I mean, in the case of D, for instance.
Yeah. Well, D was a superhero, and he had that weird, like, parasitic hand face.
Vampire Hunter D is a weird fucking movie.
Yes, it is. Vampire Hunter D is playing World of Darkness on acid and not bothering to come down for dice rolls.
No, not really, no. What the fuck?
And now the crazy spirit monster, like, warps space and comes out of your stomach, and you see babies everywhere. It's like, what?
What the ever-living... Okay, fine! Yeah, But yeah, I do think looking at that sort of that transition of you start with the barely human sort of parasitic monsters from old folklore,
Right.
and then sort of watching that evolve into what we have today, which is largely bordering on sort of a weird variant on basically the succubus/incubus.
Yes, absolutely. And they're very much about the forbidden power and allure of sex.
Yep.
Sometimes it's embraced, and sometimes it's... Although Daybreakers, which is a fun movie, not a good movie, but a fun movie. Vampires are very much more about overconsumption and maintaining a lifestyle that you simply can't while running everything into the ground.
Right.
Because the premise of Daybreakers is vampires are a thing. In fact, vampires have taken over. The vast majority of the human population has become vampires. As a result, there's a significant shortage of blood. But everyone's doing their best to make pretend that there's plenty to go around. Don't worry, just keep on doing what you're doing.
Right. Yeah, there's one other aspect of sort of the modern vampire, which I think is, we haven't touched on, which is that whole allure of not just power and sex, but also immortality.
Yes.
And that fear of death.
Yes, there's also very much that. And I'm immortal. I cannot die. blah blah blah, princes of the universe.
Yes. That actually reminds me amusingly. I did when I was back in college. I've mentioned this before. I played in a vampire LARP,
Right.
and we tossed around some of the guys who were running. The guys who were running it tossed around. There were some homebrew rules they found for incorporating Highlander immortals into it,
Awesome.
which is kind of an interesting concept.
Well, what happens when you drink from an immortal? Is it just like you burn your tongue?
Honestly, I think that would, given the sort of connection with the immortals and holy ground and all that stuff. I have a feeling it would be a really, really bad idea for a vampire to do that.
Yeah.
That might fall in the category. That might actually be just flat out fucking lethal. See, aha! I'm drinking for. Oh God, why? No.
Reminds me of Back to World of Darkness again briefly. One of the other shapeshifter kin from Werewolf, the ratkin, shapeshifting rats. I love them. They're awesome.
Yeah.
Here's the thing: drinking blood of a shapeshifter for a vampire is a huge power boost for them. Unless they tried it on a ratkin, which gave them which made them vomit blood for days and gave them a terrible trip. Ratkin blood was the brown acid.
Oh dear. So yeah, and I actually honestly thinking about it, there's an interesting sort of dichotomy between like a sort of not dichotomy, but I'm trying to think of the right word for it. But like if you're looking at Highlander immortals and vampires, there's sort of this weird sort of quasi mirror image between the two.
Yeah.
Because they're both immortal, but they've got these weird, very different ties.
Yeah, because they both still had the specter of death, and it's all the more real because of how much they lose when it happens. Because the immortals have to watch out for other immortals because they're gonna fight you for the prize and they're gonna take your head. Well, vampires are also immortal, but sunlight sucks.
Right.
As do chainsaws.
And
One
fire.
of my favorite ag damage weapons.
But yeah, it's just and sort of I think sort of vampires they both have sort of something that in theory they're striving for, and in World of Darkness, sort of one of the things that they're trying like the goals for a vampire who's trying not to become a monster is trying to achieve Golconda and recover their lost humanity.
Right.
And that's basically what the prize is in for Highlander immortals.
Transcendence. I didn't know it was so much recovering your humanity as utter transcendence and like I know everything kind of deal.
Well, but that's the thing. That's the big thing with Connor is he's human again. At the end, not just yes, he has that sort of transcendent knowledge, but he's able to he can have kids again.
Right, I completely forgotten the Highlanders are sterile.
Highlanders are sterile, and he gets and if you there's a recovering sort of some of that lost humanity. It's the same thing for you're recovering some of that lost humanity with the vampires too. I guess in sort of a weird sort of way, the Highlander immortals sort of what the prize is basically sort of this weird combination of recovering humanity and what the mages are striving for in World of Darkness.
Right, which is we know everything.
But they're trying to one of the big goals is it's not just for the mages. They're trying to shepherd humanity as a whole to sort of an elevated transcendent state.
Yes, and that's one of the things I liked about the mages in World of Darkness was that our goal is that everyone wins and everyone gets what they want, even the bad guys.
Right. Well,
that's the world we're trying to build.
That's the other great thing about Mage the Ascension, honestly, is the technocracy. That's their goal, too.
Yeah, they're just going about it in an entirely different way.
And
one that is anathema to everyone else.
It's an anathema. Yeah, exactly. I love the world. If you isolate Mage the Ascension from the rest of the World of Darkness, I love that world. It's brilliant. Just the game itself kind of sucks.
Everything is so ill-defined.
Yeah.
That was my biggest problem with Mage, was that everything was so ill-defined that actually trying to do anything was so dependent on your ability to bullshit to the game master.
I'm okay with that to a certain degree.
Sure, but
I play Amber, for instance. I mean, come on.
that's cool, but don't make me roll dice when my goal is to bullshit the effect to the game master.
Well, exactly. That's the thing, is that's a game that screams to be a diceless game.
Yes.
And it's not, because, White Wolf, honestly. Well, they had a system they wanted to keep using it, so they didn't have to write something
They
new.
had a system they wanted to keep using. They wanted it to be compatible with their other systems.
Exactly.
And I understand that.
I do too. It just didn't work very well, in my opinion.
Both Changeling and Mage were sort of the
Yes.
odd guys out in that they didn't... Conceptually, they didn't fit. Like, I understand why you wanted fairies in the World of Darkness, and why you wanted mages in the World of Darkness. Yep. But the concepts as to how things work for them just didn't click with the rest of it.
Yeah, I'd agree. There's a lot of really interesting stuff there, but yeah. So looking more back at vampires, though, I mean, because we got to not drag ourselves into mage, because. But I mean, it's I think, but that back to that sort of that lure of immortality on top of the the sex and power and everything else.
At the same time, the ennui with immortality.
Yeah, and that's another powerful sort of storytelling aspect. And that's part of the reason that so many vampires, like even the ones who start out with like who are desperately trying to hang on to their humanity, just over time,
they stop trying to achieve transcendence and start trying to just maintain the status quo.
Right, and I think that's really I think that's really interesting, and it's why I sort of just thinking about vampires just in general. Because this is primarily sort of a gaming show, ideally.
Yeah,
we talk a lot.
Why we're spending so much time on World of Darkness.
Honestly, yeah, but it just it's we talk a lot about nerd culture and TV shows and movies and such, but I do want to say that I think vampires just in general are a wonderful sort of I mean they're great. They're a great sort of, they're a great tool.
Yeah, there's a lot
games.
you can do with vampires. They're incredibly mutable, which is why they've stuck around for so fucking long.
Right, and it's why there's so many different sort of, I mean, especially when you think about like all the other different areas where vampires show up mythologically in other parts of the world.
Right, like what is it? I can't remember if it's South American or Southeast Asian, but the friggin' vampire that's just a severed head that drags its own.
Yes, there are a couple of different
their
types
organs along with bat wings. And it's like, that's an awesome idea for a vampire. I think it's Japanese that I'm thinking about.
Well, it's both Japanese. It's sort of the sort of Pacific Islands area.
Yeah.
You see that in. Let me double check this. So in Malaysia, it's the Penanggalan who do that. I believe. Yes, the Nukakubi are the Japanese ones.
Yeah. Excuse me.
And you see them in in the Philippines and other places. It's just and for a lot of the ones in the out there, it's their prey are pregnant women and their unborn children, which is
fucked up.
Yeah, and it's
well, the whole concept of vampire is fundamentally fucked up. It's
right. But
corpse that steals your life and makes you into another one of it.
Right, but I mean, in their case, they're stealing stealing life from the unborn.
Yeah,
and it's a way to sort of try to rationalize and explain miscarriage.
Yep.
And I think that's actually really interesting.
It's actually a great little Hellboy short. Now that I think about it, about him wandering around Japan, and he it's getting late, so he decides to just take a nap under a tree. I mean, who's going to fuck with him? He's a giant red demon man.
Right.
When this old man comes along, he's like, "Hey, you should come stay at my place. It's not safe out here." What do you mean it's not safe out here? There are things in the woods. You should come stay at my place. Well, I'm not going to turn down a free bed to sleep in. It's better than under the tree. Okay.
Right.
And like the innkeeper has several other guests who are all a little off. And, eventually, nighttime comes, gets late, Hellboy goes to sleep, but not before overhearing them all talking about how they're going to eat him. So, he goes to sleep. Waits till they stop talking, then he gets up and walks over and finds they're Their bodies are sitting there with the heads gone and they're hollowed out. He's like, I know exactly what this shit is. Ties them to an idol and dumps them in the lake. The heads come back and they're like, okay, let's eat. Where the hell is Hellboy? Where the hell are our bodies? Oh, shit. And the rest of the comic, it's only a few more panels at this point, is them desperately trying to convince Hellboy to give them back their bodies. And the sun comes up, and because they're not attached to their bodies in the sun, they all turn to dust. So...
Oops. Yeah, it's just... But yeah, that whole sort of, the other thing is you think about like a lot of the classic vampire weaknesses. This is sort of going back to sort of what
they're universally like averse to sunlight.
Right, but I'm not just thinking about like the classic sort of the whole garlic and such.
Yes.
That ties back to that sort of the whole fact their analogies for sickness.
Yep.
Garlic is very high in vitamin C, for instance. It's very good for you.
And it's very pungent, so it covers up the smell of death and decay.
Right. So, I mean, there's all this really interesting little stuff. You look at it and you're like, wow, I see where this is tying into into where they come from in mythology, and that's really cool.
And the whole idea of staking the heart is the heart is the seat of life, and even unlife. So if you put a stake through it, and depending on where in Europe, it's sometimes a very specific type of wood, oak or birch, both of which have very strong ties to life and good health.
Right. Actually, interestingly, I was when I was doing some research on this, there was at one point, people were, they would, when people died, they'd make their bodies, there was plague or death in the area, they'd go around, to dead bodies and stake them.
They'd stake, and they'd stuff their mounds with stones.
Right. And, well, the other big thing that it wasn't always wood either. The other option was it was iron occasionally.
Yeah, it was occasionally iron because iron is very much a symbol of civilization and like beating back the wilderness and the things that live in the dark.
Yep.
Like, we made this out of dirt. We made this out of dirt and rocks, and it's better than either combined. So clearly it is the way to defeat the supernatural.
And, I can totally get that. That it makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
And just looking around, it's like, oh. But, there's all sorts of, really, I just, the vampires are just they're fascinating, honestly.
They are kind of cool, and I'm more interested in other mythological beasties in general. But yeah, and I think we're going to have to touch on Twilight.
We will in a second. Give me 1 second, because I did want to circle back to the Jiangshi.
Okay, yes.
Because they are, in a lot of ways, very clearly vampires. They're undead. They survive by draining the life essences from their victims, except in Jiangshi, they're stealing breath, not blood.
Right.
Specifically qi,
There's a lot of stuff in Europe about stealing breath also, but it's almost always linked to either fairies or demons.
Right. But the difference there is that Jiangshi are primarily mindless, and that's one of the reasons a lot of people don't really consider them vampires.
Yeah, I could see that being more akin to, like, particularly bizarre zombies.
But I do say that I find them really neat, and they're in one of my all-time favorite Hong Kong movies.
Mr. Vampire.
Mr. Vampire, which is a brilliant, brilliant movie with a hilariously goofy dub.
Wonderfully silly. Yes.
It's still, the really funny thing is, the dubbing is hilarious. The dialogue is comical, but it's still a really fun supernatural thriller.
Yes.
Combined with an amazing kung fu flick.
The bit where they where the priest is like, Sifu, Sifu, teacher, teacher. I remember now.
Yes.
tells his students, go out and get me a whole bunch of sticky rice. We're gonna line the dojo with it. Like, okay, we don't have enough sticky rice. Let's just get the other rice. He doesn't care. It doesn't quite hold back the Jiangxi.
And he gets so mad at them.
Yes.
This isn't sticky rice, you idiots.
Oops. Well, you should have told us we needed sticky rice. I did.
What do you think it mattered? Well, you could have asked me. Why does he want sticky rice? This is the only thing they can't...
Poppy seeds. That was another weird thing that that vampires are weak to.
Yeah.
They have to stop and count poppy seeds.
Well, stopping and counting things it pops up in a lot of vampire mythos for some reason.
It pops up in a lot of weird supernatural stuff in general.
Yeah.
There's a great myth about Baba Yaga breaking into someone's house, and at night when he's enjoying a late dinner, so he hides in the closet because he doesn't want to be eaten because Baba Yaga's terrifying, and she finds his silverware there, so around the meal he abandoned to hide in the closet. So she counts the silverware. Then she sort of sighs and goes through the rest of the house, counting the rest of the silverware until sunrise comes, and then leaves.
Yeah, she had to count spoons or something like that, right?
Yeah, I think it was spoons specifically. Yeah, I think he was eating stew or gorsh or something.
It's just really it's interesting. It's really weird, and I think the other really interesting thing I just sort of is I don't know. There's a lot of just sort of, and then sort of this weird sort of the other interesting thing, the thing I always found sort of interesting is where and when vampires got tied in with sort of the occult and witchcraft and such. Does that happen at some point? I'm not entirely sure when.
Yeah, I'm not sure where exactly that happens. Another weird evolution of things. I think it probably has to do with with that sort of weird transition where the church is a lot more powerful, but people are becoming much more involved and literate with regards to church practices. Mm-hmm. Or you've got okay, this is all really arcane and I don't quite understand it, but it's for God, so it's cool. But what about the bad guys? Obviously, they must have similar things, so vampires must do it too.
Right.
I'm certain it's something like that, but I could not... That's pure supposition on my part. I haven't done any actual research.
Interesting. But yeah, there's all sorts of interesting stuff, and you start looking at some of the path, some of the the origins of vampire belief.
Yeah.
And there's a biochemist who sort of proposed a link between vampiric folklore and the blood disorder porphyria.
Right.
And the way you treat porphyria is by intravenous ham, which is blood transfusions and such, and and he suggested the consumption of large amounts of blood may have transported some across the stomach wall and into the bloodstream, and so those vampires were people suffers of porphyria trying to replace lost blood with lost red blood cells and such with by drinking it and apparently because victims of porphyria do actually crave the ham in human blood, and it might ease the symptoms, which is
weird, but yeah. Oh, that makes perfect sense.
Now, mind you, this is all sort of a misunderstanding of actually how symptoms of porphyria, but whatever.
Misunderstanding in Europe, that never happened.
During that period, but it's really interesting. And additionally, there's ties. Rabies has been linked to it just because some of the susceptibility.
Right.
Because the whole sort of susceptibility to garlic and light thing could be due to hypersensitivity, which happens
with rabies. Yeah.
Yep. And it fucks with it fucks with your brain too, and will fuck up your sleep patterns and other sorts of stuff.
Yeah, no, rabies is bad fucking news.
Oh, it's one of the most horrible diseases that any human can be.
Yeah.
After a certain point, it is untreatable.
Yeah. Once symptoms start appearing, it's untreatable. Woo!
Yeah. And interestingly enough, wolves and bats, which are often associated with vampires, often are carriers of
Often are
rabies.
carriers of rabies, yeah.
Yeah. So, there's all sorts of interesting sort of, the other sort of hypothesis for, vampire legends are influenced by people being buried alive due to shortcomings in medical knowledge at the time.
Yes, yes. Like, guys, I was just taking a nap.
It's just...
Yeah, another, like, cool story that I'm remembering, coming from Ireland, actually, about, like, I'm not sure the time period, but it was a long-ass time ago, where, the mortician is, like, preparing some local that died, for burial. And he decides to take a break, and he pours himself some whiskey to have a drink. And the corpse immediately sits up and goes, "What, you're not going to pour a drink for your old friend either?" So, yeah, that weird shit like that.
Yep. All right, Eric. We should talk a bit about, as we've touched on vampires in various forms of media. We've talked about, the various Dracula movies.
Yep.
We've talked about Anne Rice's stuff. We have to talk about Twilight.
We have to talk about Twilight. Okay, so let me say right now, my problems with... I don't have a problem with how she changed the vampire mythology. Like I said, vampires are by their very nature incredibly mutable and are really good at adapting to whatever mythos people want to have in there. So the fact they avoid sunlight because they're sparkly, fine, whatever. It's kind of lame, but cool. You can make it work. My problems with Twilight have much more to do with the tremendous amounts of frankly monstrous subtext in it. Mm-hmm. Like and I've watched the first two movies more to see what the hell everyone's complaining about.
Okay.
So I at least have some inkling about what I'm talking about here. But the way Edward is just this frankly terrifying creeper that only gets away with it because he's pretty. Mm-hmm. Bella's constant swooning over him at the same time he's like... Edward's this horrific creeper that wants to eat Bella, but won't allow himself because it would be wrong. It's just... fucking creeps me out about the way it's so anti-sex. Mm-hmm. So profoundly anti-sex. The manner in which he's so emotionally distant and emotionally abusive towards her. The fact that she eats it up to the point where when he breaks up with her in the second movie, she spends the entire movie trying to commit suicide. Just wow! Fuck Twilight.
Yeah, I get that. I'm just sort of thinking about it though. It's sort of, how completely different is that actually from sort of the whole Dracula Mina Harper thing?
Oh,
I can tell you what the big difference
is.
Dracula knows he's a monster.
Dracula knows he's a monster.
And Dracula's definitively
Mina also knows that he's a monster.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's going into that with eyes wide open.
Well, the other big thing is Dracula's the villain.
Yes. There's no sympathy for Dracula.
Nope.
And the... It's okay that Dracula's repugnant because he's a bad guy.
Right.
He's the bad guy. He's the monster. But to hold up Edward's mopey, abusive tendencies, like the kind of emotional terrorism he wreaks upon her,
mm-hmm.
And hold that up as a desirable trait.
Yeah,
just pushes every button I've got.
I understand. I agree with you, actually. I'm playing devil's advocate.
Fair
Kinda.
enough.
The big thing is, it's really interesting. You look at Edward, and he should be Edward should be the villain of the story.
He sneaks into her room and, like, looms over her bed while she sleeps. This is shown as romantic in some way, not at all creepy.
Edward, if he wasn't a vampire and was in a different universe, would be the kind of guy that, the FBI would hunt down as sort of, potential serial killer type stuff.
A slight shift in tone, and you have a very special Lifetime movie.
Yeah.
That's all it would take. You could keep the script the same, just shift the direction slightly.
I mean, you look at this, and it's like, if Edward was portrayed as the villain of the piece, it's all of a sudden a better story, probably.
Yeah, honestly.
I can't say definitively. I've not read the books, and I've only seen parts of the movies.
I haven't read the books, largely because I've heard that the prose is ungood.
I've read a couple of excerpts, and it's not good.
And having watched the movies, I'm much more comfortable wasting 2 hours on a terrible movie than I am on several or more on a terrible book.
Yeah. But yeah, so you look at it, and you're like, if that's the problem, is that I'm okay with vampire, like you taking a vampire and making them into a hero if you
Certainly.
do it right. I mean, all you have to do is know that my favorite arc in the entirety of Astro City is definitively Confession. And
yes.
One of the two major characters in that is the Confessor, who, this is a spoiler, and I'm sorry I'm going to spoil it for you. He's a vampire. He is probably one of the greatest good guys in the entirety of Astro City.
Yes.
And he is a vampire, and he knows he's a vampire. He knows he's actually deep down a monster, and he's fighting against it to do right, because he was a priest, and he's trying to,
Yeah, he's trying to find redemption.
Redemption. And it's brilliant. He's a fantastic character.
No, Confession, it's a great story arc, and the Confessor is kind of fucking awesome.
Kind of fucking awesome. He's fucking awesome, period. he is the fucking man. I love the Confessor. He's amazing. And I'm not going to spoil the actual sort of story of it, because finding out that he's a vampire is a mid-story twist. But it's not the actual sort of big arc of the story, so I'm not going to spoil the actual ending of it, because it's so worth reading.
Yeah, no, it's totally worth checking out. Everything involving Astro City is worth checking out.
Yes, because Kurt Busiek's amazing. He's
Yeah.
a great, great writer. The art's good. The covers are stunning. Unsurprisingly, Alex Ross does the cover art.
Yeah.
That's the other reason.
Did I tell you about the poster I saw that he had done of Super Grover?
Yes, you did, and I
It was kind of awesome.
it doesn't surprise me. Alex Ross is amazing. Alex Ross he's just great. But yeah, the Confessor, that's like, you look at that, it's like, it's a superhero comic, and right there, the Confessor. I mean, I can think of another, effectively a superhero who's a vampire in a fictional setting. Another actually
Angel?
surprising. Yes, yep, from Angel.
Yeah, Angel from the Buffyverse. Yeah.
Specifically from the Angel series,
Yes.
where he actually has gone into being basically a doomed superhero.
Yeah. I still say the best episode of that was the one where he got turned into a puppet.
It's a good episode.
Oh, look at the wee little puppet man.
And I mean, Angel's a surprisingly solid series.
Angel, I didn't enjoy Angel too much when it was on. It's something I caught later on, and discovered that I enjoyed quite a bit.
Well, for me,
it's not as good as Buffy, but
no, it's not. But I actually started appreciating it more when I was watching it and had that realization that, wait, I'm watching a street level superhero show.
Yes.
That changes everything about that show. I mean, Angel is basically, in a lot of ways, minus the whole religious angle, he's in a lot of ways like the Confessor.
Yes.
And, that's actually kind of cool. I mean, he's not as good a detective as the Confessor because the Confessor is basically Batman.
Yeah, but he's also got Wesley and Cordelia to help out with that.
Exactly.
And Cordelia isn't too busy being like demon pregnancy of the week. She had that happen a lot, if I remember correctly.
Poor Cordy.
Yeah.
But Angel's is a surprisingly solid show. It's Whedon. I mean, it's not Whedon's best work.
No, not at all. But it's pretty damn good.
It's good. It's really solid.
It's better than Dollhouse.
Yeah. Dollhouse is one of those things that was conceptually actually really interesting, but
I think the biggest problem was that Elijah Dushku just didn't have the acting chops, which is not a knock against her, because quite frankly, that the role they cast her in would have stretched fucking anyone.
It wasn't her sort of role.
Yeah,
there are certain things she's really good at, and then there's stuff like Dollhouse.
Yeah.
Which on first glance,
what's her name? The one from Orphan Black. She would have been good for it because she could do 10,000 different personalities in the same scene.
Yeah. I have to watch more Orphan Black, speaking of which.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, but sort of bringing this all back to gaming because, again, sort of the putative theory for our sort of overall overarching thing, sort of genre for our show. Vampires are, as we mentioned, are just great things for you. They're great grist for any sort of role-playing game. They fit in virtually anything with a supernatural element at all. I mean,
absolutely.
They're phenomenal.
Or even if you decide to introduce a supernatural element to something that typically doesn't have it.
Absolutely. I mean, they are fantastic villains just in general. I mean, like they work like classic fantasy stuff. A vampire as a vampire noble who is it's sort of the evil noble turns out to be a vampire.
Yeah.
Classic right there, and vampires because they're smart and
manipulative and
charming. A large part of their threat isn't their physical nature; it's everything else about them.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that you have to fight a vampire.
Oh, fuck. No wonder those guards are so tough. They're thralls.
Exactly. And they work well with superheroic stuff, as we mentioned, for obvious reasons. I mean, they pop up all over the place in comic books.
Yes.
I mean, Blade.
Again, because they're so fucking mutable. They fit into any comic book universe. Blade
leaps to mind. Because it doesn't have to be supernatural. It can be based on just scientific stuff. Some weird mutation,
I don't see any sign of Blackulus. Not ruling out Caucasian vampires, though. Yay, Venture Brothers.
Yeah. And urban fantasy, of course. Duh.
Yep.
I mean, you see them occasionally in science fiction, too. I mean, from aliens who act like vampires.
Mm-hmm.
Which you see all over the fucking place.
There had to have been at least 2 Star Trek original series.
Yeah, including the Salt Vampires.
Oh, yeah, the Salt Vampire. Actually, you know what? The vampires in the Dresden universe are actually really interesting.
Yep.
Because you've got... They're broken up into 3 courts. Mm-hmm. You've got the Black Court, who are very much the Bram Stoker, like, more classic medieval vampire. They're walking corpses. They're very smart, but they're walking corpses. They don't bother with fangs. They just tear out your throat and drink the blood that way.
Okay, sure.
They're nigh impossible to kill. Sunlight's pretty much the only way to do it. Although they have an aversion to signs of faith and garlic. Won't kill them, but I'll drive them off. And there are very few of them. They're the most physically imposing, but the easiest to deal with. There's the White Court vampires, who are they're basically succubi. They're the most human of them. They have the least obvious weaknesses and have the most political power, because sexy guy or girl knows how to manipulate people. It's their shtick. Not sexy people. The White Court vampires, it's their shtick. They know how to manipulate people. They don't even need superpowers to do it.
Right.
And then you have the Red Court, who are much more your classic Bela Lugosi vampires. But their human form's just a mask. Like if they throw down, they actually shed the human form, and they're like these like flabby, glistening black bat monsters, with the extended arms but without the wings,
Interesting.
with narcotic saliva. Like you don't want to get licked by one of those guys because you get really high,
Huh.
and then you can't fight, and then they eat you.
Interesting. But yeah, I was just sort of thinking about, science fiction
The
vampires.
Red Court have gone by at this
Right.
point in the Dresden story arc.
I was just thinking about science fiction vampires. I mean, some of them, will go from like the god awful movie Life Force from the
I
80s.
forgot about that movie.
Oh boy, that's a bad movie. Uh, they of course don't, but like most of the sci-fi vampires seem to don't really drink blood per se. I mean, some of them do, obviously, but
Yeah, most of them seem to be like psychic vampires.
or absorb life force or something like that.
Yeah.
Weirdly, I think the Wraith from Stargate Atlantis they're kind of vampiric, if I remember correctly.
They're kind of vampiric, yeah, because they've got the hand mouth, and they draw out your life force that way.
Yep.
The Shark Eldar, they're totally Shark Eldar.
Yeah. They're kind of cool, actually.
They're kind of cool, but they're totally Shark Eldar.
I'm not a huge fan of Stargate Atlantis, but they're interesting.
But they definitely count as space vampires.
Oh God, yes, I would definitely say that.
They're creepy. They're super strong. They're really hard to kill, and they drain your life's horse. And you never see them in bright light because they're creepier in the dark.
Yep.
Also, it means you don't have to spend as much on makeup.
Yes. Let's see. What else? I'm trying to think of other sci-fi vampires off the top of my head.
I remember seeing some really, really terrible movie where there are vampires on Earth, so mankind goes to their home planet in order to find a way to defeat them, and it turns out that the home planet is like full of dinosaurs, and all the cavemen there are vampires, and really weird, clearly like hacked together from like 3 different movies they bought the rights for.
Yeah.
I totally got the Robotech treatment, but not as good.
Right. Oh, right. Of course, Planet Nine from Outer Space.
Oh yeah.
Well, Bela Lugosi's in it. I mean, oof. But yeah, you see sci-fi vampires, and I was just sort of, and I want to touch back on anime again, just briefly, because I mentioned Hellsing.
Yes.
I've not watched all of it. I've watched some of it. I've watched
Hellsing Ultimate's the one to watch, honestly, because the original Hellsing, they sort of take this like complete left turn at some point, and they're like, and it just gets stupid with like a cool idea of of an Art Deco voodoo vampire from Africa who dresses like a Mondrian painting. But he sort of comes out of nowhere with no build-up, shows up, and apparently is the big villain.
Interesting. I caught the final episode of Ultimate.
Was that the one with all the Nazis?
Yeah, the Nazis are all over the place in Ultimate. I mean, duh.
Yeah, that's how you. That's also another reason why Ultimate's better. It involves killing Nazis. Who doesn't love that?
Have you seen the final episode of that?
I have not.
Oh God, why? It's just this giant clusterfuck of death and destruction everywhere, and everybody going completely batshit crazy and evil, and horrible things happening, and what?
This sounds like exactly the opposite of what you want for the ending of a show, Peter.
Yeah. I just sat there confused watching it. I'm like, I was up late, and it was a Saturday night. It was on Adult Swim. I'm like, oh, they're showing the end of Hellsing Ultimate. I've seen parts of it. What the hell? I'm tired. I'll watch it. So I started watching it. Okay, it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool. Wait, what? I don't. All right. Some of the fight scene stuff's pretty cool, and oh, okay. So the guy who worked for the church with the glasses, who's kind of cool, basically becomes the church equivalent of Dracula, and they fight. And, everything goes crazy, and blood and death everywhere. Basically, he shoves the holy relic into his hand to basically give himself immense power.
Okay.
It's like one of the nails that Christ was nailed to the cross with.
Right. Right.
And
Oh, apparently that's not the last episode.
okay, that would help. It was billed as that last episode, but
There was a problem for a while where the rights to the last couple episodes were not available in the U.S. for some reason.
okay.
So there's a good chunk of it out in the U.S., but you couldn't watch the ending. There's like 2 or 3 episodes could not be brought over to the U.S. for whatever fucking reason.
Okay.
Eventually, Funimation bought the whole parcel and now has it on their website, which is where I'll be watching it. But yeah,
it was an extra long episode, and it was very strange.
but yeah, I remember Matt Gertman complaining incessantly about not being able to finish Hellsing Ultimate for that reason.
Because there's a huge battle in London with the Nazis and the church, and whatever the organization in England is that held that Alucard is working.
I think it's actually the Hellsing organization.
Might be, yeah. I don't know. Hellsing confuses the fuck out of me. I'm sorry.
I'm going to become a giant multi-eyed shadow dog because awesome.
I don't know. It was interesting. The parts I've seen have been interesting for the most part, and I think Alucard's a really interesting character when he's being Alucard.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, he clearly enjoys his work and works for the Hellsing organization largely because why not? I get to cat bitches and get all the blood I need, and it's fun for now.
Yeah, I don't know. I was underwhelmed by the actual ending of it, of that episode at least. If there's more after that might actually help resolve some of the insanity in there, okay. Because basically, if that was the actual when I thought it was the last episode, I just was like, wow, everybody loses. Well, that's a way to end. That's a way to end a series. I don't have any connection to any of the characters because I've not watched enough of the show, so I'm like, it didn't bother me.
Right.
But I'm like, wow, I've got almost no incentive to watch this show now.
Yeah, I've watched a bit of Ultimate. I need to finish it at some point.
Max Rage actually...
Basically, I got to the point where there were zombies to Nazis. I was like, awesome, I will totally finish this. And then I got distracted.
All right, so according to one of our viewers in chat, Max Rage, Alucard's goal in life was basically being defeated and dying, but only by a human, since only a real human can defeat a real monster. And Anderson using the nail, that defeated the whole point.
Right.
Because he's no longer human.
Right.
And Cryptical in the chat says there should be more Anderson using the nails, not the end of the manga. Okay. Good. Because that was a terrible point to end the story on. With the Nazi scientist guy going, everything's going went to my plan, blah, up on his Zeppelin.
There's a Zeppelin?
Oh, there's Nazi airships flying over in London.
I really need to finish this.
Oh, I was watching and I was thinking Eric would fucking love the crap out of this. That was actually one of the thoughts running through my head. I'm like, from a sheer spectacle standpoint, it was kind of cool, I have to admit, but...
Right.
I sort of felt about it sort of... I enjoyed that episode, that extra long episode, sort of the same way I enjoyed Vampire Hunter D.
Right.
It made no fucking sense, and it was crazy and insane, but D had sort of a more... it had more resolution, really.
Yeah, the Vampire Lord dies, which causes the castle to collapse, which causes the wasteland to expand, yet also somehow contract, and I don't understand.
Vampire Hunter D makes no fucking sense. Yeah. It's a fun movie, but dear God,
fan service girl watches him right off into the sunset, waving like straight out of Shane.
Except he's not dead.
Except he's not dead, right?
Because newsflash, spoiler for the movie Shane dies at the end.
It's kind of the whole point.
Yeah, the fact that people are like, maybe he didn't die. No, he's dead.
He's dead.
He, like Spike in Cowboy Bebop, he's dead.
He's dead.
Honestly, the only possible... Speaking of Bebop, the only possible way Spike's not dead is if the Yakuza saves him. The Yakuza save him, at which point... I That's actually a more tragic ending for Spike than him actually
Yeah,
dying.
that's kind of like the worst possible ending for Spike, honestly.
Because at that point, he basically gets sucked back in and is basically in charge at that point. And
Yeah, which is exactly what he does not want to be.
right, the whole point for Spike was getting out. Of course, the person I feel most awful for in all of Bebop is hands down Faye.
Yeah, Faye really just eats a big bag of shit at the end.
It's just like, wow, she's finally figured out where she belongs, and there goes Spike to his death.
Yeah, and
well, maybe at least
and Ed's already fucked off and took Ein with her, and Jet's just not in it anymore. Like, his heart isn't in it because all his best friends are fucked off and left him, and it's just him and Faye. And they're not very fond of one another.
No, but I like to think that the two of them managed to settle the difference to go on to be fairly competent bounty hunters after that point.
Yeah.
And at least not kill each other. Oh, God. That's the whole thing. Cowboy Bebop is at its heart a Yakuza film.
Yes, absolutely.
Yakuza story, and that means that, Spike is doomed. Like, anyways. Back to vampires. Anyways, but yeah, vampires are remarkably, as Eric said, very mutable, and you can use them in a lot of different ways. From villains to protagonists to just general antagonists to erstwhile allies to just about anything. I mean, they are great allegories for a lot of different stuff.
Yeah.
From disease and death to sex to power to immortality to corruption.
Yeah, they're big on corruption. To overconsumption. I liked 30 Days of Night, the movie.
Okay.
It wasn't good, but I liked it.
Fair enough.
And yeah, the whole premise is that the vampires are just going completely nuts, devouring this town in Alaska because it's a 30 Days of Night. Let's go nuts. We don't have to worry about the sun. And they totally do.
Mm-hmm. And, all the way to being adorable, fuzzy things that teach you about counting.
It's true.
Oh, count on count.
Sometimes I even like to blank myself.
Actually, I think the most...
Sorry, censorship.
Yeah, yes. I think one of the most brilliant things about Count on Count is that the fact that he's all about counting really ties into the vampiric mythos.
Yes, actually. I'm willing to bet that was entirely, on purpose.
Oh, God, of course it was. We're talking about Jim Henson here.
Henson knows his shit.
Yes, knew his shit, but yeah, no. I made myself sad.
What if Henson is himself a vampire?
No, sadly.
Yeah.
At any rate, we've been rambling about vampires for a long time. They're remarkably... As we said, they're mutable. You can use them in a lot of different ways in gaming. There's a lot of great vampire fiction out there. Of the stuff we've talked about, in terms of the fiction we've mentioned, stuff I would recommend checking out. Very definitely the Confession arc from Astro City. It's bound in a trade paperback. It's 6 issues. Totally worth reading. It's one of the best. It's one of the best sort of mini stories I've read in a comic book ever. It's
totally not even an afternoon. It's during lunch.
Yeah, it's
during lunch if you don't actually pay attention to the art, which you should.
You should, because it's really good, and there's a lot of stuff going on there. Confession, I really recommend. I'm trying to think of a vampire movie I legitimately recommend. The Hammer Brothers vampire movies from the 70s are fun.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go with those.
Visually, Bram Stoker's Dracula from, was it the 90s?
Yeah, I think it was the 90s.
Late 80s, or late 80s, 90s, somewhere in there.
No, it was definitely 90s.
Okay. Is visually a stunning movie, and there's some very good performances in it. It's worth watching. It's just not great.
The Hunger is not bad.
That's not bad. Love at First Bite's a good vampire comedy.
Blackula is actually kind of fun.
Yeah, but it's just the children of the night. Shut up! One of my favorite lines ever. Honestly, actually,
I would want to I want to recommend 30 Days of Night just for the more gribbly vampires, but we spend so much time screeching like velociraptors and being subtitled where they're croaking at one another, because apparently vampire language is croaking and hissing. Like, why do they need another language? But whatever.
Actually, Blade.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's not a great movie, but it's a good, fun action flick. It's Goyer not being a complete asshole.
Yeah,
worth watching. The other Blade movies are increasingly silly and stupid, but the first one's actually not bad.
The third one is...
Oh, Lost Boys. What am I thinking?
Oh, fuck yeah, Lost Boys. That's a great one. Worst thing about St. Victoria is all the fucking vampires. Best ending line to any movie.
And honestly, as much as it pains me to say it, the movie adaptation of the Interview with the Vampire is surprisingly solid. Despite Tom Cruise.
I don't know. Tom Cruise does a pretty damn good job selling Lestat.
Yeah, he's not bad, but I'm saying despite Tom Cruise because I'm not a Tom Cruise fan.
The bigger problem with that movie is actually Brad Pitt not being able to act his way out of a box, because apparently the director just couldn't be bothered to kick Brad Pitt's ass into acting.
Pitt needs that occasionally. I mean,
he totally needs that occasionally.
He is
a lazy actor. He will totally knock it out of the park if you beat him up. But if you just let him do his thing, he's not going to fucking... He's going to read it like for a telephone book.
Unless he's genuinely there having fun.
Unless he genuinely enjoys what he's doing.
See Ocean's 11, where everyone in that cast is just going, "This is fun," and it's one of the most infectiously fun movies ever. Let's see, TV series involving vampires.
Buffy, Angel.
Buffy and Angel. Yep. Beyond that, role-playing games. If you enjoy White Wolf system at all, the Vampire the Masquerade's a fine game.
I don't know near enough to recommend the New World of Darkness.
Yeah, I don't either. But honestly, I've heard good things about it, so it's probably worth checking out. And you can throw vampires in almost any role-playing game you want to. Are we forgetting any sort of...
Nothing like playing in a murder mystery straight-up cyberpunk game and having the guy you've been tracking turn out to be a fucking vampire.
Oh, there's a great adventure seed, actually, that reminds me, in one of the... I think it was GURPS Cyberpunk, actually. No, it was adventure seed for GURPS Cyberpunk, which I read in one of the Pyramid magazines back in the day when Pyramid magazine was a thing.
Right.
Which was sort of an little adventure seed for. There's this weird sort of the player characters are hired to deal with this really savage cyber cycle gang, who were killing people left and right, and draining the victim's blood and all this stuff, and then you find out as you're going through them that it's actually a gang of cyber vampires. Which is actually kind of awesome. That
is kind of awesome. That reminds me of an old Something Positive comic where Devin and Mike are playing in a role-playing game. It's like their first session, and it's they're doing GURPS Vampire the Masquerade. So Mike, this is back when Mike was still just a fucking twat, decides to attack Devin and drink his blood. Turns out because the game master told him, just pull whatever you want from GURPS. That's cool. Turns out Devin had a chainsaw cyber arm.
One of the viewers in the chat, Cryptical, actually asks, says one of their better gaming experiences was running Expedition Cave of Ravenloft, which is a third edition remake of the first edition Ravenloft module. Have you guys had any experience with the original Ravenloft module or Ravenloft in general? I have, yes.
Yes, Ravenloft is a lot of fun. It is not something you can do an extended campaign for.
But honestly, Ravenloft as a concept thing to throw into a D&D game where the players get sucked into Ravenloft and have to find a way out is actually really cool. And Ravenloft is chock full of vampires. That's part of this shtick of Ravenloft is it's all about gothic horror. And
Strahd.
And there are multiple realms in there, and several of them are ruled by vampires. And I've not run Ravenloft. One time I was involved in Ravenloft was as a player in a second edition AD&D game, and we got sucked to Ravenloft. It was the Feast of Goblins Adventure, which is really good. It's a really good adventure, and I enjoyed it immensely. This is back when I played a lot of second edition AD&D.
Yeah, same here. I remember there was back when I played second edition D&D because didn't know any better. Getting lost in the foggy woods and coming out into Ravenloft, and going, nope. Try to turn around, turn back. Nope, you're stuck. That's not how it works.
Nope. But yeah, Ravenloft's actually really cool, and it's a great example of a great way to use vampires, honestly. And Gothic horror in general in Dungeons and Dragons. It's definitely worth checking out just from a fluff standpoint. Vampires are interesting, and they're a great tool for gaming, honestly. So, but that's gonna do it for this week. I think we've run a bit long. So I think we should wrap things up. Unless you got anything else you want to say about vampires, Eric?
I think we covered it all. I even got my little rant about the toxicity of the fucking Twilight movies.
Excellent. So vampires are interesting. They're not really of the sort of classic Gothic horror monsters. They're not Eric's favorite.
No, werewolves and flesh golems are definitely better.
I definitely grab the flesh golems just because Frankenstein's fucking amazing.
Yes. Frankie's legit.
Yeah. At any rate, wow. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I hope you all had fun. We'll be back next week with something or other. We try to save time at the end of each episode for viewer questions. We did not get any this week, so we didn't bother saving.
Yeah, we kind of went a half hour long here.
Yeah, well, we didn't save any time for it, and we didn't get any anyway, so. But we do try to save time for that. If you've got questions you'd like us to answer, please do send them to us. Our email address is surlygrognards@yahoo.com, surlygrognards@yahoo.com, or you can post them on the forums, which you can find at mechagm.forumer.com, or if you're listening to this on YouTube, just post them in the comments. If you've got feedback for us, constructive criticism, ways we can make the show better, let us know. We really love getting that stuff. It's really helpful. And if you've got show topic suggestions, we send it to any of those places also. We adore show topic suggestions because that means we can tell you guys, we can talk about stuff that you guys want to hear about.
Yes. Also, it means we're not scrambling 10 minutes before the show going, what do we want to talk about tonight?
To our credit this week, we didn't do that.
That's true.
We had a full 2 hours today. Because I remember to do it at 5 o'clock.
Yeah, pretty much when I turned that fucking computer on, I was like, hey, what do you want to talk about? Peter, can I check my email? No.
I wanted to get out of the way first so I could do a little bit of research, goddammit, since I thought we might be talking about vampires. Anyways, but yeah, if you got show topic suggestions or anything like that, email them to us, post it on the forums, in the YouTube comments, or you can send a tweet to me. My Twitter handle is @mechagm. I try to tweet before the show goes live. We record every Monday night here on twitch.tv/mechagm. If I tweet it out on my Twitter handle is @mechagm, as I said. And if you enjoy the show, you're listening to the recording of this, do hit like and subscribe, and you'll be able to catch the recordings whenever they go up. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching tonight. We hope you all found this enlightening, entertaining, useful, whatever. We were mostly on topic for once.
Yeah, weird.
I know. I'm scared and confused, Eric.
What have you done with us? That doesn't work.
No, it doesn't, because we were both on topic.
Yeah.
God damn it. Are we in a mirror? Are we in a mirror universe, Eric?
Quick, check yourself for goatee.
No,
wait, I already had one.
You already had one. I have a full beard, so I have not accidentally shaved it off or anything. So
I
Right.
could have a goatee hiding underneath my goatee.
That would be different. Anyways, thank you for watching, guys. We'll see you guys soon. We'll be back next week with some damn fool topic. Until I see you next, be happy, be safe, keep on gaming, and we'll see you guys in the future. Take care, guys.
Bye, humans.